authority figure in the room. Thank you all for coming to this interview with Kali Wallace, who has kindly joined us all the way from San Diego. Kali, I'm now going to read your bio so these people know who you are.
Okay.
If anything is wrong, stop me. But I got this from your website. I just converted to third person, of course. So, Kali Wallace grew up in Colorado, but now lives in Southern California. She studied geology at Brown University and earned a PhD in geophysics, doing research on Himalayan mountain building and Indian earthquakes. After attending the Clarion Writers Workshop at the University of California in San Diego in 2010, she devoted herself to writing in earnest, and sold her first short story in that same year. Her short fiction has subsequently appeared in prestigious genre publications such as Clarkesworld, FNSF, Asimov's, Lightspeed, and Tor.com. Kali sold her first 2 novels in 2014. Her debut, Shallow Graves, was published in 2016. The Memory Trees followed in October 2017. And then City of Islands, a children's fantasy adventure, was published in the summer of 2018. Kali also sold her first 2 science fiction novels for adults in 2018. The first of these is Salvation Day, which came out this summer and which will also be made into a movie. Screenwriter Kyle Gajdusek, Kyle Gajdusek, who wrote the Tom Cruise starring sci-fi film Oblivion, and was also a showrunner for the first season of Stranger Things, will be penning the screenplay. And the film will be produced by Ben Faulkner for Entertainment One, so that's a pretty big deal.
Yes,
and that's quite an interesting, career trajectory you got there, which we will get into, I'm sure.
Yes.
But first of all, are you having a good festival?
I am. I'm loving it. Yes.
Your time in Malta.
Yes, very much so. It's beautiful. And yeah, having a great time.
You've been spending most of your time in Valletta, if you want
yes, so far.
Which I don't blame you for.
The next few days I'm going to venture out.
Okay. And the very important question, which we'll get out of the way immediately: are you missing your cats?
Yes, of course I am. I'm making my housemates send me pictures every day to make sure they're okay. So.
That's an important writer's habit.
Yes.
Making sure cats are okay and are ready to supply you their support while you're writing. But speaking of writers' habits and career trajectories in general, Salvation Day is your first novel for adults.
Yes.
Not your first adult novel, which you made your mark as a writer of young adult fiction and middle grade fiction in the case of City of Islands. There's many kind of assumptions people make about young adult fiction and about how writers who write young adult fiction kind of frame that whole process. I guess my question would be, is the difference that huge? Like, was Salvation Day such a leap in the dark?
No.
Or no?
And it actually, for me, I don't write, like when I'm sitting down to write, the actual process of writing is not any different when I'm writing for whatever age group. Because it's all just, it's words on the page. You're reading a story. You use slightly fewer cuss words in certain age groups than in others, but that's about it. When it comes to the publishing side, each of the publishing communities has sort of different ways of going about things. Like the young adult publishing community or the publishing industry has a tendency to throw a huge amount of money at debut books and then sort of ignore later career writers. The children's books don't do that. They sort of expect everything to have a slow build. It's kind of a quieter, a little bit smaller community that is just in it for the long run. And when I switched to writing adult books, basically they didn't care about the other stuff. They're like, oh, your YA books didn't sell well? Doesn't matter. It's basically another debut, another first book. So from a writing point of view, it's no different, and from a publishing point of view, there's slightly different things, but it's basically the same process, and you just have different people, different working. I mean, the first 3 books were also with a different publisher. I switched to a different publisher, just because it was a YA children's imprint before. So the experience is different that way.
Yeah, and as we heard, you were also planning academic career before you switched to the industry, right?
Yeah.
There was another switch for you. Like, what was the point at which you decided that this path A was not the way?
This is not a glamorous story, but maybe that's what people want to hear. I finished graduate school with a PhD in 2007, and I'm sure everybody remembers what happened in 2007 is the global economy crashed into a pit. So it was very hard, even with a PhD, to find a job, and everyone kept saying, oh, it should be easy for you, go work for a petroleum company, which A, I don't want to work for a petroleum company, did not have that expertise or knowledge, and B, they weren't hiring anyway. So I was unemployed, I was depressed, I was living in my sister's basement, I was sending out hundreds of resumes that were getting no response, and I was like, well, why not do something that I like? Why not try writing? Because I'd never tried to publish. I've written since I was a kid, but never tried to publish before. But at that point, I was like, literally, what do I have to lose? It's not like I can, give up a career because I don't have anything. So I just decided to try to do it, and that's when I applied to the Clarion Workshop, started writing some short stories, and after that, wrote, my first couple novels. The first novel I wrote and finished, I got an agent with it. It didn't sell though. It went to 30 editors, and they were all like, "This is all right, but it's way too grotesque for young adult fiction." I don't know if they were right. I still disagree. But after that, I've been very fortunate that I've just been able to keep doing writing as my job.
Yeah, and that first manuscript, and you don't have to listen in details about it,
yes.
But given that Shallow Graves, your debut novel, is about a zombie who sets out to find the killer, I'm wondering how much more grotesque in the YA sphere that first novel.
It was actually, Shallow Graves was actually conceived as a sequel to this first novel, which was about, there's two characters in Shallow Graves who are ghouls who eat human flesh, and it was about them. And they're like, oh no, you can do anything in children's literature except cannibalism. I guess there's lines. I actually think that in a slightly different publishing environment, one where like young adult paranormal wasn't on a downward trend, it would have sold, but it was at a time when everyone was tired of the paranormal monsters and was going all in for the big epic fantasies. So, but at this point it still hasn't sold. We'll see. Maybe someday. It's probably terrible. I haven't looked at it since my agent has shelved it. So.
Yeah. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit also about the kind of further evolution of your books, just to give us an idea of how things developed from there. You had Shallow Graves and Memory Trees and City of Islands. I'm wondering, the process of writing those books one after another, or were there other things in between, like short stories maybe, or other works that informed them as you evolved towards these books?
They were, let me think about this for a second. It was, it's sort of like a leapfrogging, things, you start them, set them aside for a while. Like City of Islands, I started as a very, very different book.
Right.
Sometime, I think in 2009 or 2010, never finished it. Had, 40,000 words, set it aside, and then went back again a few times over a few years, and then finally at some point I was like, oh, first thing, this is a children's book. I hadn't realized that before. I was like, yeah, this is a children's book, and then I finished it. When I was trying to sell that first book that didn't sell, they always say, work on your, while you're on submission, work on the next thing, which is amazing advice for anyone who's a writer. Don't put all your book eggs in one publishing basket. I was working on Shallow Graves, and then I was also working on the book that eventually became The Memory Trees, which again was a very different book. So it's always sort of working on one thing and then having something else in the background is what I've always been doing. And I did that with Salvation Day. I actually, in a very earliest drafts of this was going to be another young adult novel. I mean, the main characters are quite young, and I think it works better as an adult novel, but it's kind of on the cusp.
I agree. I can see that.
And it didn't matter to me. Like it was just. But I was working on this as like a passion project in the background with no guarantee that anybody would go look at it or want to buy it. And then just while I was working on editing and publishing City of Islands. So I've always got more than one thing going. I write short stories very slowly, so I'm always sort of working on them. I write novels faster than I write short stories because I find them very difficult. But like about twice a year, I get like a bug and I'm like, oh, I have to write that story. Yeah. And I have to find time to set aside and do it. And the next novel, which is I keep gesturing to this, but it's not actually a sequel to this. It's just another space. It's another space thriller. It's called Dead Space. Probably be out sometime next year, although I don't have a date yet. They don't tell authors that sort of thing. Is actually one of the first. It's the first time in my career, it'd be my 5th book, and the first time where I pitched an idea to the editor, and them accept it, sat down and write it just fresh, without having things in the background. We'll see how that works out. Yeah, I mean it's a very interesting insight into the publishing process as well, because if we hear from your bio that you basically ever since the Memory Trees came out, there was a book a year. Yes. But in fact, it's a lot of background work. Yes, and I actually publishing, like American publishing, I don't know how it works in other markets, but they kind of push you to do a book a year. I don't like that. I think it's, I would rather do like 2 years between books, but I have to pay rent and feed the cat, so I, keep working. But there is that pressure, and it's just a commercial pressure. They don't want people forgetting your name, I guess. Yeah. I don't know if readers are that fickle, but maybe they are. Yeah. And speaking of Salvation Day, could you now give us I mean, of course I know what it's about, but could you give the other readers an idea of what the book is about? Yes, Salvation Day is a space-based science fiction thriller with horror elements, or horror with thriller elements. I don't know how you define it, about a group of people who would not call themselves a cult, but they're totally a cult. I don't think I used the word in the book, but they're absolutely a cult. Let's not be clear on that. Who decide, this is in a far future, not super far future, but a future in which humans have space travel and the ability to live in space and travel through the solar system and such. And they decide that they want to steal a ship that has been abandoned because there was a great tragedy, a virus outbreak on it. And so they kidnap some people in order to get up there, take some hostages to get aboard this ship. And what they learn when they get there is that they don't actually know what happened before with this great tragedy. And it was much worse than everyone thought. And for a long time, the working title was Death Ship, and then for another long time, the working title was Spaceship Full of Corpses, which I think pretty much encapsulates what it's about.
Death Ship is a great pulp title.
Yes.
It's not, I wouldn't say, it's a
no, and
the book is a lot more
in my heart, it's still Death Ship. But, and I actually, for a long time then, the official title was House of Wisdom, which is the name of the ship, but then my publisher was like, okay, we can't do Death Ship, but we can't do that. We need something in between the pulp
House of Wisdom is like St. Augustine title, like City of God.
Yes. It's well, also, I mean, Salvation Day, when you tag it on the internet, it's in there with all of the I'm at a church getting saved. So here's my book about death.
That's where the cult undercurrents really start to come to.
Yes, although it's not a religious cult at all. It's just a group of people under the sway of a horrible narcissist.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that cults have emerged, or at least Charles Manson has re-emerged recently in this sort of pop culture discourse with the second season of Mindhunter, with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So that's something I thought about too.
Yeah, and it was actually, I did a huge amount of research into cults because it's one of those things where you really want to, one of the main point of view characters is a believer, a true believer, a member. So you want to make sure it's realistic what this person thinks. And the main one, that I researched was Jonestown, because it is, I think, the closest like analog, because the idea was that it was, like, I was fascinated by the fact that it, the People's Temple was a group of people who genuinely wanted to do good in the world. They were genuinely trying to build a better world. Like, there were people who had mixed race families who were trying to, leave a racist America. There were people who had adopted foster children. And so this idea that people who really did want to do good in the world were led so horrifically astray was what fascinated me, and that's what I was kind of doing a huge amount of research about. And there's a lot of first-person narrative books and documentaries of the survivors. So it's something where there's a huge amount of information out there.
Yeah. I'll ask you a bit more about Salvation Day, but first, could you read us an extract from it?
Absolutely. This is just a little. I'm going to read a couple pages from when the people first arrive on the ship. Like, literally, this is their first step inside the door. And the point of view here is this young woman named Zara, who is a member of this cult and sort of the kind of the leader of this ship-stealing expedition that is about to go very wrong. Beyond the hatch was a sea of stars. I blinked, turned my head, moved my light. The stars winked and turned. It was not empty space, but a cavernous chamber filled with tiny, glinting reflections. One of the stars floated close. I reached. It bumped against my glove and spun away, so I stretched further and caught it. It was a shard of glass, thinner than my finger, clear as crystal. All of those lights, they were broken pieces of glass floating in the chamber. By opening the door, we had set them turning and sparkling, a strange, beautiful dance of air currents and debris. I looked around until I sprouted large panes of glass secured to one wall. The whole stack of them shattered where something heavy had struck it in the center. Throughout the cargo bay, there were crates and boxes floating free, broken away from the nets and bands meant to hold them in place. I let go of the shard and sent it spinning back into the darkness. I tracked its motion through the room. The beam from my headlamp danced over the walls, found conduits and panels, cargo secured to the wall with webbing, and a pair of legs. I let out a startled yelp, released my grip on the handle, and grabbed for it when I realized I wasn't anchored to anything. My body continued to turn, and I wrenched my shoulder, trying to stop myself. I kicked at the wall to straighten my arm and caught my feet against the edge of the open hatch. Malachi's voice came over the radio. "Zara, what's going on?" I took a steadying breath, then another. Dad was still in the airlock, his light shining directly at me. Even without seeing his face, I knew his expression would be one of stolid disapproval. I should have let him clear the cargo bay before entering. Carefully, I turned to look at the wall above the hatch. "I'm fine." My voice was shaky, so I said it again more firmly. "I'm fine." I was startled. "By what?" Malachi asked. "I'm not sure," I said. It was a lie. I knew what I had seen. Boots, legs. There was somebody above me. I had thought I was ready for them, the dead who waited for us. 477 people had died aboard House of Wisdom. When I tried to imagine them, I saw a medical bay filled to capacity, body bags bundled in neat stacks, storage rooms torn to morgues, faces hidden behind white sheets. I had dreamed about walking through gleaming clean corridors, and all around me there were silent figures wrapped in white, with no features except indistinct shadows where their eyes should be. In my dream, I had reached out to them to tell them they didn't have to stay aboard the ship anymore, but everyone had turned away. We had always known we would have to dispose of the dead to make House of Wisdom our home. Panya was planning a ceremony, something mournful and respectful, to prove to the people of Earth that we were not callous criminals. I pulled myself along the wall, using a line of cargo plants as a ladder. I was not going to flinch away. We had learned everything we could about the virus. We were vaccinated, we were trained, we had come prepared with supplies for testing the air, cleansing the filtration system, detecting any active traces of the virus that lingered. The warlords who had created it had designed it to kill quickly and then spontaneously denature. Cruelty and cowardly stealth were their goals. My mind was filled with knowledge about that hateful weapon. "What is it?" Dak asked. His light grew brighter behind me as he came through the doorway, giving me an overlarge, distorted shadow. I climbed over the crates until I could see the corpse. She had not finished putting her spacesuit on. She wore no helmet or gloves, and the legs weren't properly sealed into the boots. Her face was waxy and shriveled. It had been cold and dry inside the ship for 10 years. She was mummified. Her straight brown hair floated like a fan around her face. Her entire torso, her shoulders, her upper arms, they were all stained with blood. It was such a shocking sight that at first I thought my eyes were deceiving me. It could not be blood. It had to be something else, oil paint. My mind tripped over the unlikely possibilities. The stains were so dark, the blood so thick. I could not immediately locate her wounds. I had to be wrong. I needed to get closer. I could not make myself move. A rapid and totally fatal outbreak of the virus. That's what they had said. Dizziness, fainting, fatigue, internal bleeding that might lead to a bloody nose or bloodshot eyes or bruises, but nothing like this. Rapid pulmonary failure, an hour, maybe 2, from the onset of symptoms to death. Within minutes, the victims were too weak to move, much less save themselves. Many fell into comas almost immediately. That was how House of Wisdom was lost. For 10 years, they had been telling the same story. This woman had not died in a coma. She had not died quietly.
Thank you. First of all, did you have any idea that Zara is a Maltese surname before this?
I did not.
It's even spelled like the surname, so Zara, like the chancellor. So that's one thing. But one of the most interesting things about the book is that you actually have 2 narrators.
Yes.
You have Zara, or well, 2 points of view. You have
Yes.
Zara's narrative, and you have Jaswinder.
Yes.
Who are on effectively the opposing sides of this situation. And again, we touched up, you had touched upon this yesterday during the conference as well, but the political commentary of the novel isn't subtle. Jaswinder is from, how would you describe, he is part of the...
A very privileged
Yeah.
background, like his parents were scientists,
Mhm.
he has relatives like high in the government, which is not really analogous to any government we have now, but you know.
Mhm. It's a kind of hegemonic structure
Yeah, right.
the cult, quote unquote, would be is very much opposed to.
Right, yes, there would be like the people who live outside the margins of this very deliberately planned society. And yeah, Zara is very opposite of that. She comes from, you know, a background, or has lived the last several years of her life basically outside the society, which is, you know, one way in which cult like leaders isolate their people and make it easier to build it's its own micro society. But yeah, that was very deliberate. I always knew it was going to be the captor and the abductee as the point of view from the very earliest imagining of the book. But the actual political and social details of their respective backgrounds grew as I realized that this was an important part of the story. Because once you start thinking, I knew initially this is one of these silly things that all writers will eventually admit, but basically I was like, you know what, I just really want to write space horror, like Aliens, and then went from there. So I didn't start with any I'm going to write about inequality in society. No. I was like, I'm going to write
space corpses,
Contagion in space. With I love the idea of, and this is just something I've always loved, the idea of this abandoned sort of dark, cold spaceship that's been empty for some time, almost a gothic, even though it's incredibly advanced technology, this place where you're moving through it and it's the remains of something that happened before. And it's like a haunted house in space, basically.
Yeah.
But as the story develops, okay, why are these people in this situation? What would make them do this? And that's when I started thinking about what makes people who are not necessarily bad people, but are badly misguided, take these extreme actions. I mean, Zara is essentially a terrorist.
Yes.
And, okay, what makes people take these terrible actions and do terrible things for their own, for their own goals. And for her, it's for her family, for these people who have become her family, to try to get them away from this incredibly unequal society and basically take their micro-society elsewhere where they can live by themselves, which is, it's, you know, all in a science fictional setting, but it's not really a very science fictional goal. That's why people have traveled to newer worlds.
Yeah, and what I really liked as well about the way you present the opposing side, where it's not just this, you know, universally good society. There are layers of darkness and corruption, and the characters themselves could come to contest that because of the situation.
Right, and I wanted it to be a like this idea that I feel like there's a lot of science fiction that either presents, you know, like very homogenous future societies or like complete dystopias. You know, you have like the Hunger Games versus Star Trek in terms of, you know, it's like either you have a really good society or you have a complete mess. And it's like, oh, I think mostly humans create badly functioning societies over and over again. And they make the same mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, there's always going to be inequality. There's always going to be people who take power for, you know, their own purposes, who, you know, make decisions about who deserves support and who doesn't. And so I just wanted a sort of realistic, without getting hugely into the details, because it is a thriller that takes place over 24 hours. You know, it's not super heavy on the world building, but wanted it to be recognizably like, okay, this is a society where some people in power are trying to do good, and some people are very much not, and everyone else is like, oh, okay, you know, different degrees of being disenfranchised by the way everything is set up.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned aliens, but I thought it's also quite close to something like, I don't know, Danny Boyle's Sunshine, or you know, even Event Horizon, not as much, but you know, that kind of thriller. Now, I know you said obviously screenwriters are not in any way involved in the process of, writers of the source material are not in any way, even screenwriters aren't, but in any way involved in the production process. But you must have thought of fantasy casting.
I actually haven't.
Come on,
no,
I don't believe you.
Because the thing is I'm not super well versed in like deep cuts of movies, and like, you know, one of the main characters is of Indian descent, and I don't actually know of that many. I mean, India has a massive film industry. There must be, you know, dozens
more than just Dev Patel, you know.
Right, yeah, there must be dozens of, you know, 20-something young Indian men who could play jazz. And so I actually haven't thought too much about it. It's not, like, I'm not the most visual when it comes to people. They kind of are, like, character-shaped, like, I'm always, like, looking out from them rather than, I don't know. So it's not something that I've thought about, so.
Okay. Could give you suggestions of Indian writers. I'm not a huge Bollywood person.
And I mean, it's one of those things where it's, I kind of specifically don't give very detailed, like, descriptions, so I don't actually sit down and work out, like, physical characteristics beyond a few key things, because when I'm reading somebody else's book, I actually find it a little hard to picture if they're like, you know, she has her silver eyes and all this stuff. It's like, oh, wait, this person, looks like this, looks like this. It's just not the way my visual, like, mind works. So I tend not to do that for my own characters.
Because one thing I'd say about your writing in general, I think you do place a lot of emphasis on creating a very emphatic character relationship with your protagonists especially.
Yes.
I think I definitely felt that, for example, in the memory trees, where, you know, the protagonist's trajectory was very close and very intimate and tied into the landscape as well.
Right, yes.
And in this case, how was that process for you because you obviously, Jazz and Zara had to have an equal footing in terms of the emotional weight of the story. Yeah. So how did that process work for you?
It was actually a lot of fun because I I feel like this is the first time I've written something that's really, like, heavy on action. Yeah. And when it's writing on action, it's always like, okay, what terrible thing can happen next? What terrible thing can happen next? You know, and in this situation, it was a little bit of like a little evil genius thing going on in my head where I'm like, okay, they think they're going to get away. How can I make them not get away? Okay, they think they know what's going on. How can I tell them, you know, it's actually way worse than that? And once I had a little bit of a struggle, like keeping an equal balance, and then, like, spoiler alert, once you separate the characters and have them discovering different things, and know that it's going toward a goal where they will rejoin and, you know, sort of share knowledge about what's going on, that became, it was a lot of fun to go through and work out when I was revising it, because the first draft was super imbalanced and, you know, meandering and had weird sides, but it was a little bit like puzzle solving or problem solving, and I love that part of writing where it's like, okay, I need people to know this, this, and this, and I need people to know this, this, and this, and the reader will know all those things, but the characters won't, and going through all of that, so it was, like, that aspect of it was really fun, and then just a lot of rewriting and revising to sort of give them hopefully different voices. I'm not sure I actually succeeded on that. I think all my characters sound like me. But at least different perspectives and different depth. Like, they care about different things. They have different people around them and different backstories. And,
I think they're also, both of them are also very much, by definition, very much defined, maybe not by definition, but by sort of situation, they are very much defined by the people who surround them as well.
Yes.
Because you have both characters who are sort of not as militant or extreme as a lot of their counterparts.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that also gives it a nice kind of well-rounded context.
Right. Yeah. It's very much. I mean, it is like Zara is a person who is, you know, very much wants this thing, but Jazz is somebody who's just roped into this shitty situation.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's part of his. He's a survivor of this tragedy, so it's part of his backstory. But he doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want anything except for him and his friends to survive, and it. So they're coming like in a common place, but from very different directions, and that, I think, is makes it easy from a writing point of view to be like, okay, what do they do next? And they have very different goals, so it makes it that when you have two characters who clearly want two very different things, it makes it a little easier to separate the threads of the story and sort of sneakily all drive it towards an ending. So.
And speaking of sort of trajectories and that kind of narrative engine, do you think the 24-hour time limit was what helped this to be optioned for film?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Was that planned?
No. I mean, it. I wanted it to be fast-paced. And I also realized very early on, I was like, well, I put myself in a situation where they have a time limit, like, you know, either everyone's going to die or someone's going to show up and rescue. Like, there's a time limit there, and also it's just not this kind of action where it's all in zero gravity, which I don't have personal experience of. So it's I had to do a lot of like, wait, how does fire work? Wait, how does people like cry? What happens to blood? I don't. All these questions that I don't know. And why do I set myself research problems? It's fun, but I realized it was not like to be able to sustain that kind of tension. I was thinking it like as a. Like I said, I was like based on like Aliens or sort of Alien and Aliens, where you have the build of dread and then suddenly everything explodes into craziness. But I wasn't thinking of it like, I want this to be a movie. I would write a screenplay if I wanted to write a movie. But I was thinking I wanted to be a compact, fast-paced, like just constant ratcheting of tension. Which I hadn't really done before. Like, it's a little bit in various things, but not to this extent. So, but I absolutely do think that when they were, I know for a fact that my agent took the book to people in Hollywood before it even sold. So somebody else read it and was like, this is because it's it's a closed system. It's
makes it easier for everyone
there's
to adapt.
Very much a linear progression of plot that is, constantly raising action, which I did on purpose because I like to read that kind of stuff. It was fun.
So tell us about. It is called Dead Space. Right?
Yes,
you decided to call it Dead Space, which is not quite Death Ship, but you're almost there. Which is the follow-up to Salvation Day.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
It is it's another sort of sci-fi thriller, but this one has a little bit more of a mystery bent to it. It takes place in a not very distant future, a different future from this one. It's not in the same world or related to it, where people, like humanity, has managed to sort of get out to maybe start mining some asteroids, but not much further. Like there's no interstellar travel, there's no faster than light anything. It's like our world except space, and it's like our world in that everything is controlled by massive corporations and very wealthy people, and it is about a woman who works somewhat reluctantly as a security personnel for one of these major corporations and goes to an asteroid mine to investigate a murder. And so it's, again, a very claustrophobic sort of space, something, there's fewer corpses, many orders of magnitude fewer corpses. But it is about, this person that she used to know in her previously different life has died, and so she is part of the investigating team, and there's an element of how these great, factories and mines are run by artificial intelligences. So I had to do a quick learn about a lot of that stuff. But also very much about, people who are like pawns in these great corporate machines trying to keep believing that life has value even when they're, basically stuck working in this place. Because, if you work for somebody out in space, you can't just leave. You're in space. So it is that, but hopefully it will, I'm waiting for my editor to get back to me, so I have turned in my first draft and it hasn't been revised yet, but hopefully it will be, again, mysterious, intense, and exciting, and it's just one point of view this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of the same but different, I'm always curious about when writers sort of return to something, to a similar setting or character, or what was it that drove you to write another novel set in space? Was it leftover research stuff, things you did not get to do in Salvation Day, or is it something completely different?
It was, a little bit is external. It's the publisher is we want something the same but different. But also it's just that I have had lots of, I love reading science fiction, space-based science fiction, and I've always loved it. And so when I was casting around for ideas, I was like, well, I want to do something that's a little more closer to our modern time, but is still I was for Dead Space, I was thinking a little bit more analogous to the Expanse books. It's, more recognizable, but still, but without the weird alien stuff that they have going on. I love those books and the show, but something a little bit more close to home. And I also really kind of love that gritty, dark, sort of noirish sci-fi. So that's what I was going for with. The trajectory of my writing career, especially in terms of novels, is I like something, so I decided to write it, and it's worked out so far.
Great. Okay. Are there any authority figures in the room? I think they've all left.
Yes.
But I'd like to open us up to questions now. So does anyone have any questions for Kali? William?
Yeah.
If you have to give some advice to somebody who wants to approach a publisher with a pitch, what would you say?
Well, what I would say, working in the American publishing arena, is find an agent and have the agent approach publishers with pitches. I don't know how that works in other publishing things, but I would say, is this about fictional works? One thing, I think the most common mistake that I think writers make when they are pitching an idea for a fiction is to focus on sharing all the details of the plot and sort of neglecting to show that there's a character arc. So focus on, making the character somebody that people want to see a story about when you're doing a pitch. And that's, will actually, when the right editor sees it, it will sort of snag something in the brain and be like, oh yeah, I want to know about this person. Because anybody can write a list of plot things, but making it a character who can generate like feelings of empathy in readers is like the next step, the next level. So that would be my advice when you're actually writing the pitches.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Yeah.
I think you're gonna get a mic.
Yeah.
Don't have to shout.
I don't hear very well.
You mentioned that in America you get pressure to write a novel a year.
Yes.
And also I was intrigued by the fact that you're writing for different audiences depending on what. How much of that pressure affects your ability to write for yourself? When you sit down and write, are you thinking about the sort of ultimate target audience and hitting that are you writing a novel that you would like to read yourself?
I feel like I've been a little bit lucky in that my first couple books didn't do very well. Like they did okay, but I was never a breakout, success. So when I was casting around for what to do next, there was no like huge audience pressure being like, we want more of this. So, and I'm also lucky in that I have an agent who literally anything I send to her, she's like, okay, we'll figure out how to sell this, which is not always the case. Sometimes people have a lot more pressure. So it actually hasn't, like, I think about it, but I think about it in terms of like, okay, how do I write what I really want to write in a way that will still let me pay the rent? But like for my, the book that I'm writing right now, not the Dead Space, but the one that I hope to sell after that, I was talking to I sort of exchanged some emails and stuff with my current editor, the editor of the sci-fi books, and I was like, how do you think about a contemporary horror set in Connecticut? She's like, that sounds fine. So basically it's, I feel like the overall is that it's easier to beg forgiveness than to ask permission. So so far I just write what I want to write, and a couple times it hasn't sold, but I've been able to move on to the next thing. So I do think about it because I need to, keep doing a career, but I also like lots of different things. And I think that's also a benefit.
Okay. Anyone else? Good.
Mentioned briefly about writing a story in space and the details that you need to research.
Yes.
I'm really a bit curious how you go about doing this research, because there are some things which you can't get wrong writing.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure I made mistakes, but when it comes to the space stuff, I have a PhD in physics, in geophysics, so I have a pretty strong. It's not a space-based research, but I know enough about physics to know what questions I needed to ask, which I think is the biggest hurdle to get over. And as for the rest of it, this is where I admit that I'm very lazy. I write it and then I backward engineer everything that I need to research. I'm like, I guess I should figure that out after the fact. Which is why I'm certain that there's mistakes in there, and I don't read my reviews, so if people have called me out on them, I'll do better next time, guys. But so I sort of know what I needed to start with. And also I've read a ton of science fiction, so I sort of absorb a lot of that. If you read space-based science fiction, you sort of absorb a lot of the things that in the genre are considered outlandish or are more realistic, but also it's not the most technical book. It takes place in space, but there's a lot of hand waving about how efficient the engines are and how people survive in space. I I didn't deal with that at all. I just assumed that in the future, medicine is different. So, yeah. I think knowing what you need to research and knowing what you don't need to explain are the keys.
All right. All right. We have a question of that.
So when writing your novel, you would take an artistic license to break the rules of physics. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
I actually, I think people sometimes, they think because I have a scientific background and spent years doing research that I would want to be like, you know, rigid about the rules of science. And there are science fiction writers who are like, no, only what is possible and, you know, have very strict rules, but I don't care. If it makes a good story, I am happy for people to have transporters and faster than light and I don't know, whatever, anything. I mean, I also write fantasy and I write horror. I like, for me, the science fiction is more about like the feel of it and the idea that like humans can explore in space and have a future that is about, you know, discovering new and weird things. And yeah, bend the rules, break the rules, have fun. I mean, we're making stuff up. Like if you make things up for a living, you might as well have fun doing it.
Okay, maybe one more question. All right.
No.
Oh, okay.
More
There
of
you
a
go.
comment
Yes,
than
yes.
a question, and I don't
Oh
need
God,
to
you're gonna be
my-
that person.
No,
There
but
has to be one.
it's super refreshing to hear that being said, like the specifics and the details of something do not need to be perfect for the. I still don't.
I can hear you, but you're closer, yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Because I'm a writer myself, but my partner is a doctor. So it's a really big deal whenever a story is written. It has to be like any scene in a medical scenario is a pain in the ass because it has to be, you know, that just doesn't happen. The nurse would not do that, and it's really.
I mean, I also get that because geology is one thing that people get wrong in science fiction all the time. Even the old dudes like in the science fiction world who are like, you must know delta V of all your rockets, they must work like this. They still get the geology wrong because they don't think it's real science or something. And like there's books where they'll be like, oh yeah, North America split down the middle because of earthquakes. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. So I get it, but I'm also like, I think a part of being a writer and being a reader is to like have this willingness to like read generously. And you're like, you know what? Is that really what matters in this story? Is it taking you for a fun ride with characters you want to hear about?
Exactly, having fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I would not want to put like the virus stuff in this in front of a doctor. They'd be like, oh honey.
I wouldn't even go there.
Yeah.
No.
There's a lot of Brian Fuller's Hannibal in terms of how some
Yes, which is my
corpse
favorite
architecture.
show
Yeah,
ever, and
yeah.
it's obvious. And there's one scene in particular that I think the corpse garden, which is what I like. It's
Yeah.
so
It's pure
inspired
Hannibal.
by Hannibal that
So-
I'm not even pretending otherwise. It is
Yeah,
absolutely
So it's for
great.
fans of sci-fi horror and definitely fans of NBC's Hannibal.
Yes.
Thank you very
Yes,
much.
thank you all so much for
Yeah,
coming.
thank you very much. Thank you. So, hope you stick around. We
Yeah, you
have,
should stay for
Dave.
Dave.
Dave Rudden will be interviewed by Robert Pisani,
Yes.
who is Malta's most prolific reader. Whenever the Booker Awards show up, we are all very much intimidated by the pace at which he reads all the long-listed and short-listed novels. So I'm sure, and Dave being an excellent raconteur, I'm sure it will go up swimmingly. So thank you once again, and stick around for the guys.